What is metaphysics? In this video, I want to talk with you about what metaphysics is, and it's not just one thing. So I want to talk to you about all the different categories that you might be studying within metaphysics. I want to give you some examples of metaphysical problems, and I want to just name drop some people who have talked about metaphysics. Let's get started. Metaphysics is one thing you might study in philosophy. Philosophy is the science of the sciences. It's philos, the love of Sophia, wisdom. It's when you are focusing on a particular content matter, thinking about it, asking questions, finding answers, questioning the answers. Metaphysics is when you're getting philosophical about Now this would be the part where I can fill in the blanks, telling you exactly what metaphysics is, but metaphysics is not just one thing. For the most part, metaphysics is all about asking questions about existence. Existence or being, reality. For example, what exists? And sometimes this question is called ontology. Not to be confused with oncology. Ontology is a field that you'd be studying. It's a metaphysical field that asks questions about what is existing, being itself. So this is a kind of topic in metaphysics. But we could break this down further as well, and we can ask about categories of existence. What are the kinds of things that exists? And we can make a long list of that. Okay, let's consider these potential categories of existence. Let's start with this one, universals. Is there such a thing as a universal? Is there a category of things that exist that are universal? Universal, like circle. A circle. Does circlehood exist? Like, here's a circle, here's a circle, here's a circle. This particular circle exists, or this particular circle. Okay. But how about the universal? How about circlehood? Okay, forget the example of circles. Think about beauty. You might point to a song and say that the song is a particular thing that's beautiful. You might point to a woman and say that that woman is beautiful. You might point to a house and say that that house is beautiful. Those would be particular things that exist that you're attributing beauty to. But what about beauty, the universal, the form, to use words from Plato? Let's go to properties. How about the property of being beautiful? How about the property of being red? Does red exist as a property? How about numbers? Like, here's one marker, and now I've got two markers, and now I've got three markers. But we're describing markers numerically, quantifying them. But does the number 3 exist? Does the number 2 exist? Do numbers exist? How about relations? I could be somebody's son. I could be somebody's best friend. I could be somebody's enemy. I could be somebody's wife. I could be somebody's neighbor. But do relations themselves exist? How about material objects? Here we could be asking questions about idealism and materialism or physicalism or dualism. Let's zoom out of these details. Let's go to a different part of metaphysics. Let's think about modality. If you are doing metaphysics, you might be thinking about modality. Modality is a lot. Of course, there are ways that we could break this down as well. Modality is thinking about existence not only in what is, which is what we were talking about here, but what might be or what could be. So here we're thinking about hypotheticals. We're thinking about conditions that may exist but don't currently exist. When we're thinking about modality, we're thinking about what's possible and we're thinking about what's necessary. And that's a way to think metaphysically, to be thinking about what might happen, what could happen, versus what is happening. Sometimes what is happening could happen but doesn't need to happen. Other times what is happening necessarily happens. And all of that is a small branch of metaphysics, which is a small branch of philosophy. So think about this when you're thinking about modality. How about this statement that it is possible for me to have a daughter? It is possible for me to have a daughter. Now, say that this is me saying it. That's me, Sahar Joakim, Dr. J, as my students call me. Is it true or is it false? This statement, it is possible for me to have a daughter, if I said it now. What makes it true? Usually what makes a proposition true is if it matches reality, if it matches what is. But when we're talking about what's possible, if we're talking about what could happen, what might be, how do you say that a statement about what might be the case in the future is true or false? That's something you'd be studying in metaphysics if you're thinking about possibility and necessity, which is a portion of the modality portion of metaphysics. Let's zoom out of those details too. Let's think about mereology. And it's all about the relationships between the whole thing and the parts that come together to equal the whole thing. And so it's about part-whole relationships. Think about this marker. For instance, this marker is a whole thing. It's a marker, and here it is, and I can write with it. But it's made up of different parts. There's the paper that's absorbing the ink, and then there's the plastic, and then there's the ink, and then there's this other plastic thing. There's all of these smaller things that come together to make the whole thing. And in mereology, you'd be asking, what is this? Is this marker nothing but the total sum of all of its parts? Or when you have all the parts, when you put them together in the right order, then you get something more than all of the parts put together? Those are the kinds of questions that you're dealing with in mereology. Let me give you an example of a metaphysical problem that is found when you're doing mereology, called the ship of Theseus problem or paradox. It's unclear if it's a paradox, but sometimes it's called that. So in the ship of Theseus paradox or problem, you have this thought experiment. You're supposed to be picturing a ship that's having its parts replaced one by one. And the question is, at what point do you no longer have the same ship? Because just replacing its flag doesn't make it a whole new ship, right? Or does it? If you had a ship and you replace the flag, do you now have not the same ship? How many parts do you have to replace to have a whole new ship? And here's a plot twist. If somebody was replacing all of the parts to your ship one by one, but as they were taking away the old part, putting in the new part, they saved the old part like in a junkyard, and then they put all of the pieces together, who's got the real ship of Theseus? Okay, you're asking about the relationship between the whole thing, the ship of Theseus, and the parts of the thing, like the plank of it, and the flag of it, and the pole of it, and the engine of it. And this asks questions about identity, so it gets into other portions of metaphysics, but it's its own thing because it's asking about the relationship between the parts of a thing and the whole thing together. Mereology is one way to be doing metaphysics, but metaphysics is not just one thing, it's a lot of things, and on this board we've got 6 different things it might be. We've discussed ontology, modality, and mereology, but we haven't even talked about identity. And when you're thinking about identity, you are in the realm of metaphysics. Like, what is a thing? What is this object? And how does this object exist throughout change that is natural in time? How does an object persist throughout the changes. So you could be thinking about the ship of Theseus problem that we discussed for mereology, but for here, this identity portion of metaphysics, you could be thinking about lots of things. You could be thinking about you. Think about yourself when you were 6 years old. What was your hair color? How much did you weigh? What was your favorite food? What was your favorite color? What did you want to be when you grew up? And think about yourself when you were 16. Think about yourself when you're 26. Think about yourself when you're 36. Well, when you're 6 and when you're 36, you had a lot of different things going on in those two stages of your life. How are you even the same person? How can you, yourself, exist and still be the same? How can you persist? How can your existence persist through time? These are the kinds of questions that are being dealt with in the identity portion of metaphysics. But there's also cause and effect, which gets into the weeds. Here we could be talking about determinism versus free will. This whole debate falls under metaphysics because it's asking about existence. Physicalism, sometimes called materialism, and it's the idea that everything that exists is physical, versus idealism. So you have a physicalist versus an idealist. The idealist is the one who says only ideas are real, like George Berkeley says that only ideas are real, physical things are not real. And then you've got Thomas Nagel, who argues against physicalism by discussing consciousness and trying to prove that consciousness exists in his paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? All of this is metaphysics.